Mustapha had learned early that the world did not listen to boys like him. Invisible, hungry, forgotten. But on one cold night at the edge of a silent forest, he saw something no child should ever witness. Two men dressed like power itself were burying another man alive. Not just any man, but Chief Oladipo Balogun, one of the richest men in Lagos. Mustapha's heart pounded as the earth swallowed the billionaire inch by inch. He could run, or he could speak. But who would believe a homeless boy over men in suits? What Mustapha chose next would change everything. If you're watching this, tell me your country and local time in the comments. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe. You never know which story might change the way you see the world. In the restless heart of Lagos, where the streets never truly slept and the air carried the scent of survival, Mustapha existed like a shadow. No one cared to notice. He was no more than 12, though hunger had carved deeper years into his thin frame. His clothes hung loosely on his body, faded, torn, and permanently stained with the dust of the streets. His feet were bare most days, toughened by hot asphalt and broken glass, yet still vulnerable to every unseen danger beneath him. Mustapha did not remember the last time someone had called his name with kindness. Once, long ago, there had been a home. A small one with cracked walls and a leaking roof, but it had held warmth. His mother's laughter had filled the space like music, soft and steady even when there was barely enough food to share. She used to tell him, no matter how hard the world becomes, never let it harden your heart. At the time, he had not understood what that meant. Now on the streets, those words were the only thing he carried that had not been taken from him. She was gone now. Gone in the quiet, cruel way poverty often erased people. No warning, no justice, no one to mourn, but a child too young to fight it. After her death, Mustapha had learned quickly that grief was a luxury he could not afford. Hunger came faster than tears. Cold nights demanded stronger attention than memories. Survival replaced everything. His mornings began before the sun rose, when the city was still stretching itself awake. He would wander through crowded markets, like Balogun Market, searching through piles of discarded goods, half-eaten food, plastic bottles, anything that could be sold for a few coins. Shop owners shouted at him, waving sticks or throwing insults sharper than stones. "Go away, thief, you street rats, bring nothing but trouble." Sometimes they did not even bother with words. A kick, a shove, a slap that came without warning. Mustapha rarely fought back. He had learned that fighting only made things worse. Silence, he discovered, was safer. Silence made him smaller, and being small meant surviving another day. By afternoon, the heat would become unbearable. The sun scorched the pavement until the air itself seemed to burn. Mustapha would retreat into whatever shade he could find under broken kiosks, beside abandoned buildings, or beneath the narrow shelter of roadside stalls. There he would sit quietly, watching the world move past him. People in expensive clothes walked by without seeing him. Cars with tinted windows glided past, sealing off lives he could never touch. Laughter echoed from places he was not allowed to enter. He was there, but not really there. At times, Mustapha wondered if he had become invisible. But the nights were worse. When darkness fell, Lagos changed its face. The noise softened, but danger grew louder in other ways. Gangs moved through the streets. Drunk men stumbled through alleys. The police became less patient, more violent, more willing to sweep boys like Mustapha away, as if they were trash cluttering the city. He had learned to find places others overlooked. A broken bus stop near the edge of town. A half-collapsed building where the walls still stood just enough to block the wind. And sometimes, when luck was on his side, the back corner of a closed shop where the security light flickered, just enough to scare away trouble. But even in sleep, Mustapha was never truly at rest. Every sound could mean danger. Every shadow could hide a threat. Still, there was something about Mustapha that refused to die. Kindness. It showed itself in the smallest ways. If he found more food than he needed, he shared it with younger children who roamed the streets like him. If an old woman dropped her belongings, he would quietly gather them and return them without expecting thanks. Once he even gave away the only piece of bread he had because another boy looked hungrier. "Why did you do that?" the boy had asked, confused. Mustapha had shrugged. He did not know how to explain it. It just felt right. Perhaps it was his mother's voice still living inside him, or perhaps it was the one thing the world had not managed to take. That evening, the one that would change everything, began like any other. The sky had darkened earlier than usual, heavy clouds gathering like a warning no one could hear. The wind carried the scent of rain, sharp and restless. Mustapha had spent the day scavenging with little success. His stomach twisted painfully each step, weaker than the last. When the rain finally came, it came hard. The streets emptied quickly. People ran for shelter doors, slammed shut, and the city that had ignored him all day suddenly disappeared, leaving him alone with the storm. Mustapha ran too, not toward safety because safety was never guaranteed, but toward the nearest place that might keep him dry. That place was the edge of the forest. Few people went there, especially at night. Stories had been whispered about that place of strange things, dangerous things. But to Mustapha, it was just another corner of the world that did not want him. He found a broken wooden structure near the tree line, its roof barely holding together. Rainwater dripped through in slow, steady drops, but it was better than standing in the open. He curled into himself, arms wrapped tightly around his body, trying to hold on to what little warmth he had left. The storm roared around him. Thunder cracked through the sky. And for a moment, Mustapha closed his eyes, hoping the night would pass quietly. But then, he heard something. At first it was faint, almost lost beneath the sound of rain hitting the earth. A dull, repetitive thud. Mustapha's eyes opened. He listened carefully. Thud. Pause. Thud. It was not the sound of rain. It was something else, something deliberate, something human. Slowly, Mustapha lifted his head, his heart beginning to beat faster, without knowing why. The sound was coming from deeper within the forest. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay where he was, to ignore it, to survive the night like he always did. But curiosity, and something stronger, pulled at him. Carefully, quietly, Mustapha stood up. The rain soaked him instantly as he stepped out from under the broken shelter. The cold bit into his skin, but he barely noticed. The sound came again. Closer now, more real, more terrifying. Mustapha took a step forward, then another. Each movement slow, cautious, his small body blending into the darkness as best as it could. Branches scratched against his skin as he pushed deeper into the forest. Mud clung to his feet, making every step heavier. The rain blurred his vision, but he kept going, because now he was certain. Someone was digging, and whatever was happening out there in the darkness was not meant to be seen. The deeper Mustapha moved into the forest, the more the world behind him seemed to disappear. Lagos, the noise, the lights, the restless energy, faded into nothing but a distant memory swallowed by rain and darkness. Here there was only the forest. And that sound, thud, pause, thud. It was clearer now, heavy, intentional, the kind of sound that carried purpose, not accident. Mustapha slowed his steps. His breathing became shallow, controlled, as if even the air he took in might betray his presence. The mud beneath his feet sucked softly with each step threatening to make noise. But he placed them carefully one after another, like a shadow, learning to walk. Lightning tore across the sky for a brief second, illuminating the trees in a ghostly flash. For that single moment the forest revealed itself. Tall, silent trunks stretching endlessly, leaves trembling under the force of rain. Then darkness swallowed everything again. Mustapha froze. Something about that flash made his chest tighten. He was close, very close. Another step forward, then another. The sound grew louder. Thud. This time it was followed by something else. A voice, low, sharp, impatient. "Hurry up, we don't have all night." Mustapha's body went rigid. His heart slammed violently against his ribs, so loud he was certain it could be heard from miles away. Instinct took over. He dropped low, crouching behind a thick cluster of bushes, his small frame barely visible beneath the heavy leaves. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He listened. Rain continued to fall, masking small sounds, but the voices cut through it. Another man spoke, his tone colder, more controlled. "He's not going anywhere. Just keep digging." Mustapha swallowed hard. 2 men, not one. And they weren't just digging. They were waiting for something, or someone. Carefully, Mustapha shifted his position, inching closer through the wet undergrowth. Branches scraped lightly against his arms, but he ignored the sting. Every part of him was focused on what lay ahead. Another flash of lightning, and this time he saw them. 2 figures stood in a small clearing, their silhouettes sharp against the dim glow of a lantern placed on the ground. The light flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet earth. Both men were dressed in dark clothing, too clean, too structured to belong to this place. One of them held a shovel, driving it into the ground with force. The other stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with the kind of calm that felt wrong. Mustapha's eyes moved slowly. Then he saw it. The hole. It was deep. Too deep to be anything ordinary. A grave. His chest tightened. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. He should leave. He knew he should leave, but something held him there, something he couldn't explain. Then a sound. Soft, barely there, but unmistakable. A groan. Mustapha's entire body went cold. His eyes snapped toward the source. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadow, something lay on the ground. No, not something. Someone. The shape was still but not lifeless. Rain fell over the figure, soaking through expensive fabric that clung heavily to the body. The man's chest rose, slowly, painfully. He was alive. Mustapha's breath caught in his throat. Alive. They were digging a grave. For a man who was still alive. Another flash of lightning struck the sky, brighter this time, and for a split second, the man's face became visible. Even through the rain, even through the distance. Mustapha recognized him. His eyes widened in shock. Chief Oladipo Balogun. The name echoed in his mind like thunder. Everyone knew him, even boys who lived on the streets. His face appeared on billboards, on posters, on the sides of buses. People spoke his name with respect, sometimes fear, always importance. He was one of the richest men in Lagos, powerful, untouchable. And now, he lay on the ground like he was nothing, like he was about to disappear. Mustapha felt his stomach twist violently. This couldn't be real. It didn't make sense. Men like Chief Oladipo didn't end up like this. Not in the mud, not in the dark, not like this. The man with the shovel stopped digging, leaning heavily on the handle. "That's deep enough," he muttered. The other man nodded slightly, stepping closer to the body on the ground. "Good," he said quietly. "Let's finish this. Finish this." The words hit Mustapha like a physical blow. His hands trembled, his mind raced. He wanted to run. Every part of him screamed to run. This wasn't his world. These weren't his problems. If they saw him, if they caught him, he wouldn't just be ignored like always. He would disappear, just like the man on the ground, just like the grave waiting in front of him. Mustapha slowly began to shift backward, his body moving inch by inch. careful not to make a sound. But then Chief Oladipo moved, just slightly. His fingers twitched against the wet ground. A weak, desperate movement. A silent plea. Mustapha froze, his eyes locked onto the man, and suddenly, he heard his mother's voice, clear, strong, as if she were standing right beside him. No matter how hard the world becomes, never let it harden your heart. Mustapha squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second. This wasn't fair. Why him? Why now? Why did he have to see this? Why couldn't he just walk away? But when he opened his eyes again, he couldn't unsee it. A man, still alive, about to be buried, and no one else knew. No one else was coming. It was just him, a boy no one believed, a boy no one saw, a boy who didn't matter. But somehow, in this moment, he was the only one who could do something. The men moved quickly now. They grabbed Chief Oladipo by the arms and legs, lifting him like he weighed nothing. His head lolled to the side, rain washing over his face, mixing with something darker. He let out another faint groan. Still alive, still aware, still fighting. Mustapha's heart pounded louder, faster, so loud it felt like it might explode. He took a step back, then another, torn between fear and something stronger. If he stayed, he could die. If he left, the man would die. There was no safe choice, only a right one, and Mustapha knew it. He just didn't know if he was strong enough to choose it. The men dragged Chief Oladipo toward the open grave. The lantern flickered. The rain fell harder. And the earth waited. Mustapha stood frozen in the darkness, on the edge of a decision that would change everything. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself refused to witness what was about to happen. Mustapha remained frozen behind the bushes, his entire body trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was seeing. The world had always been cruel to him, but this was something darker, something final. The two men dragged Chief Oladipo closer to the open grave, their movements efficient, practiced, disturbingly calm. There was no hesitation in them, no fear, no guilt. This was not their first time doing something like this. Mustapha's fingers dug into the wet soil beneath him, his nails filling with mud. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts as he struggled to steady his breathing. Every instinct screamed at him, to turn away, to run, to survive like he always had. But his eyes refused to leave the man on the ground. Chief Oladipo's face was pale beneath the rain. His lips slightly parted, breath shallow and fragile. His expensive suit, once a symbol of power, was now soaked and ruined, clinging helplessly to a body that no longer commanded anything. Power meant nothing here. Money meant nothing here. In this moment, he was just a man, about to die. The man with the shovel wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing mud across his face. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. The other man, taller, sharper, with a presence that carried authority, nodded slowly. "Yes, before anyone comes." Mustapha's heart skipped. Anyone comes, they were afraid, even if only a little. Which meant what they were doing was wrong. The thought seemed obvious, but for Mustapha, it mattered, because the world had always taught him that what powerful people did became the truth. But this was evil, clear, undeniable. The taller man crouched beside Chief Oladipo, grabbing his jaw roughly and forcing his face upward. "You should have just signed the papers," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "It would have been easier for everyone." Chief Oladipo's eyelids fluttered weakly. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, broken and distant. "Kunle." Mustapha's breath caught. Kunle. The name landed like a stone in his chest. Family. This wasn't just betrayal. It was blood turning against blood. Kunle's expression hardened instantly. Whatever humanity had flickered in his eyes vanished. "Don't say my name," he snapped coldly. He shoved Chief Oladipo's head back into the mud. "Just finish it," he ordered. The man with the shovel moved forward, and then Chief Oladipo's hand lifted, weak, shaking, reaching, not toward Kunle, not toward the other man, but outward, as if searching for something or someone. Mustapha's vision blurred. He didn't understand why, but that single movement broke something inside him. It wasn't just a man dying. It was a man asking for help, silently, desperately, and for the first time in his life. Mustapha felt seen, not as a street boy, not as a nuisance, but as someone who could matter, even if just for one moment. His mother's voice echoed again. "Never let the world harden your heart." Mustapha clenched his fists, tightly, his entire body shaking, now caught between terror and something stronger. He was just a boy. They were grown men. Dangerous men. If they saw him, no, he didn't need to finish that thought. But if he did nothing, the man would die, and Mustapha would carry that forever. The men lifted Chief Oladipo again, positioning him over the open grave. His body hung limp between them, rainwater dripping from his clothes into the darkness below. The hole yawned wide. Hungry. Waiting. "Drop him," Kunle said. Time slowed. Mustapha's heart roared in his ears. This was it. The moment. The point of no return. His legs felt heavy, his breath shallow, his mind screaming, "Run, run now, forget this, forget everything." But his feet didn't move. Instead, something else took over. Something deeper than fear. Mustapha stepped out. Just slightly. Enough to see more clearly. Enough to know. This was real. The men began lowering Chief Oladipo into the grave. Slowly, carelessly, like he was nothing, like his life had already ended. Mustapha's chest tightened until it hurt. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He couldn't stop. The word tore out of him before he could stop it. The moment it left his lips, Mustapha knew. Everything had changed. The forest went silent. Not completely, but enough. The rain still fell. The wind still moved, but something shifted. The men froze, slowly, very slowly. They turned. Mustapha stood there, exposed, his thin frame shaking under the rain. His wide eyes locked onto theirs. For a second, no one spoke. No one moved. The world held its breath. Kunle's eyes narrowed. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something darker. "Who? Is that the man with the shovel?" whispered. Mustapha didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed. His body refused to obey him. But it didn't matter. They had seen him. Kunle stepped forward, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet earth. "A street boy," he said, his tone laced with disbelief. Out here, Mustapha took a step back instinctively. His heart pounded wildly. He shouldn't have spoken. He shouldn't have moved. He had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Kunle's expression shifted again. Not to fear, not to panic, but to something far worse. "Amusement." "Well," he said slowly, "this is unfortunate." The other man tightened his grip on the shovel. "What do we do?" Kunle didn't take his eyes off Mustapha. "We can't let him leave." The words hit like thunder. Mustapha's blood ran cold. "Run. Now." This time his body listened. He turned and bolted. Branches whipped against his face as he ran blindly through the forest mud splashing beneath his feet. His lungs burned almost instantly, his legs weak from hunger and exhaustion. But he pushed forward with everything he had. Behind him, voices, shouting. Catch him footsteps, fast, heavy, closer than they should be. Mustapha stumbled, nearly falling, but caught himself just in time. Pain shot through his ankle, but he ignored it. There was no time for pain, no time for anything except survival. He ran faster, harder. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one tearing at his chest. The forest seemed endless, now the darkness pressing in from all sides. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. A branch caught his arm, ripping his skin, but he didn't stop. Another step, another breath, another desperate push forward. Behind him, the voices grew louder. They're catching up. His mind screamed. He couldn't outrun them. He knew that. They were stronger, faster, and he was just a starving boy. But still, he ran. Because stopping meant death. Because slowing down meant being caught. Because somewhere deep inside him, he had already chosen, not just to survive, but to fight for the man in the grave, for a life that wasn't his, for something bigger than fear. The trees began to thin. Faint light flickered ahead, the edge of the forest, the road. If he could reach it, if he could find someone, anyone, Mustapha pushed harder, ignoring the pain, ignoring the exhaustion, ignoring the voice in his head that told him it was hopeless. Because even if no one believed him, even if the world turned its back on him again, he would not let that man die without trying. Never. Not now. Not after seeing that hand reach out from the darkness. Not after hearing that silent plea. Mustapha burst through the final line of trees and stumbled onto the empty roadside, gasping, shaking, soaked to the bone. Behind him the forest loomed, and somewhere inside it, two men were coming. Mustapha stumbled onto the roadside like something the storm itself had thrown away. His chest heaved violently, each breath scraping against his throat, as if he had swallowed fire. Rainwater streamed down his face, mixing with sweat, mud, and something dangerously close to tears. His legs shook beneath him, barely able to hold his weight. Yet he forced himself to stand. He turned back. The forest stood behind him, dark, silent, hiding everything. But he knew they were still there. Kunle, Sadiq, and the man they had buried. Alive. Mustapha's heart slammed again. There was no time. He spun around and began running down the road, his bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt. The night stretched endlessly before him, empty and indifferent. No cars, no people, just long shadows and the distant hum of a city that did not care. "Help," he whispered. At first his voice barely audible, then louder. "Help," but the storm swallowed his cries. He ran and ran, until finally, headlights, faint at first, then growing brighter. A car. Mustapha's eyes widened with desperate hope. He stumbled into the middle of the road, waving his arms frantically. "Stop! Please stop!" The car slowed. For a moment, hope bloomed in his chest. The window rolled down halfway, revealing a man in a clean shirt, his face lined with irritation. "What's wrong with you?" the man snapped. "Are you mad? They're killing someone!" Mustapha gasped, pointing back toward the forest. "Please, you have to help. They buried him. He's still alive." The man stared at him. Then his expression changed. Not to concern, not to shock, but to annoyance. "Get out of the road," he said flatly. "Go beg somewhere else." "I'm not lying," Mustapha insisted, stepping closer. "Please, he's going to die." The man's eyes hardened. "You think I'm a fool?" he scoffed. "You street kids will say anything for money." He reached for something inside the car. Mustapha flinched instinctively, but it was just the window control. The glass rolled up, the engine revved, and the car drove past him. Gone. Just like that. Mustapha stood frozen in the middle of the road, staring after the disappearing lights. Hope. Gone. Like it had never existed. His chest tightened painfully. He turned again, looking toward the forest. The darkness seemed deeper now, closer, as if it was watching him. He shook his head. No. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything. Mustapha forced himself forward. limping slightly now as pain began to creep into his ankle. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was fading, leaving behind exhaustion that threatened to drag him to the ground. But he kept moving, because somewhere behind him, a man was dying. The road began to change as he moved closer to the city. The silence broke, gradually distant voices, the hum of generators, flickers of light from roadside stalls that had not yet closed. People. Finally, Mustapha ran toward them. "There's someone in the forest!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "They buried him alive!" A few heads turned, just briefly, then turned away again. A woman selling roasted corn shook her head, muttering under her breath, "Another one of those children." A group of young men leaned against a wall, laughing. "Who did you see this time?" one of them called mockingly. The president's laughter erupted. Mustapha stopped in front of them, desperation flooding his face. "I'm serious," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, you have to come with me. He's still alive." One of the men stepped forward, his grin wide and cruel. "And what do we get for helping you?" he asked. Mustapha blinked. I don't have anything," he admitted. The man laughed again, louder this time. "Then we don't have time," he said, turning away. Just like that, dismissed, ignored, as if his words meant nothing, as if his fear was invisible. Mustapha felt something break inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like something fragile finally giving up. He turned away slowly, his shoulders slumping. Of course. Why would they believe him? To them he was just a street boy, dirty, hungry, worthless. His voice didn't carry truth, only noise. But the image in his mind refused to fade. Chief Oladipo's hand. Reaching, that weak, trembling movement, that silent cry. Mustapha clenched his fists. Tightly. "No," he whispered to himself. "I won't stop." His voice was small, but it was steady. He moved again, this time slower, scanning every face, every movement, searching for something different. Someone different. Minutes passed, then more. Hope faded with each step, until a small clinic, barely noticeable between two larger buildings, its sign flickering under the dim light. Most people walked past it without a second glance, but Mustapha stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the quiet. Or maybe it was the last place left to try. He pushed the door open. A small bell above it rang softly. Inside, the air was different, cleaner, calmer. The scent of antiseptic replaced the smell of rain and dust. A few plastic chairs lined the wall, most of them empty. Behind a small desk sat a woman in a nurse's uniform, her posture straight, her expression tired, but alert. She looked up, and for the first time that night, someone truly saw him. Her eyes widened slightly at his appearance, soaked, trembling, covered in mud, but she did not look away. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Mustapha stepped forward, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. "There's a man," he said, struggling to catch his breath. "In the forest. They buried him. He's still alive." The words tumbled out, messy, broken, desperate. The woman, Nurse Zainab Okeke, watched him carefully. She had seen children like him before, heard stories like this before. Most of them weren't real, but something about this boy was different. "Slow down," she said gently, standing up. "Start again." Mustapha swallowed hard. "They're going to kill him," he said, his voice shaking. "Please, you have to help me." Silence filled the room. Zainab studied him, not his clothes, not the dirt, but his eyes. And what she saw there was not deception. It was fear, real fear, and something else. Determination. The kind that didn't come from lies, the kind that came from truth. Zainab exhaled slowly. If he was lying, she would lose nothing but time. But if he wasn't, someone would lose their life. She reached for her bag. "Show me," she said. Mustapha blinked. "What?" "The place," she replied, already moving. "Take me there." For a second, he just stared at her, as if he didn't understand, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to be believed. "Now," she added firmly. Something inside Mustapha shifted. Hope. Real hope. He nodded quickly. "Yes. Yes, I know the way." Zainab grabbed a flashlight, her keys, and turned off the clinic lights. "Let's go." As they stepped back into the night, the rain had softened, but the air still carried the weight of what had happened. Mustapha led the way, his small figure moving with renewed urgency. Behind him, Zainab followed. And somewhere ahead, the forest waited, along with the truth buried beneath it. The road back to the forest felt longer than before. Every step Mustapha took now carried a different weight, not just fear but urgency. Hope had returned, fragile but alive, walking behind him in the form of Nurse Zainab Okeki. For the first time that night, he was no longer alone. But danger had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown. "Are you sure you can find the exact place?" Zainab asked as they moved quickly along the dim roadside, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. Mustapha nodded without hesitation. "I remember," he said. "There's a broken tree, and a clearing, and a lantern." His voice trembled slightly at the last word. The image of it flickered in his mind, the dim light, the open grave, the still body. Zainab studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me," she said, "and whatever happens, don't run off again without telling me." Mustapha swallowed. "I won't." They reached the edge of the forest. The air changed immediately, cooler, heavier. The smell of wet earth and leaves wrapped around them as if the forest itself was breathing. The faint sounds of the city disappeared once again, replaced by the quiet hum of insects and the occasional crack of branches shifting under unseen movement. Zainab hesitated, only for a second. Then she stepped forward. Mustapha followed. The path he had taken earlier was harder to see now. The rain had softened the ground, erasing footprints, blurring the trail into something uncertain. But his memory guided him, small details, broken branches, the angle of a fallen log. Fear lingered, but it no longer controlled him. Not completely. They moved slowly, carefully. Every sound felt amplified in the silence. Every step seemed louder than it should be. Then Mustapha stopped. Zainab nearly walked into him. "What is it?" she whispered. He pointed ahead. There, through the trees, faint and flickering. Light. The lantern, still there. Zainab's grip tightened around the flashlight. "Stay behind me," she murmured. They approached cautiously, their movements measured, their breaths controlled. The clearing came into view, and for a moment, everything looked exactly the same. The open space, the lantern glowing weakly against the darkness, the disturbed earth. But something was different. The men were gone. Mustapha's eyes widened. "They were right here," he whispered. "I saw them, I believe." "You," Zainab said quickly, her voice low but firm. "Stay focused." She moved forward, scanning the area carefully. The grave. That's where her eyes landed. The earth was uneven, fresh, disturbed recently. Her stomach tightened. "Help me," she said, dropping to her knees. Mustapha didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, his hands already digging into the wet soil. The dirt was heavy, thick with rain, clinging to their fingers as they worked. It resisted them as if trying to protect what lay beneath, or hide it. "Faster," Mustapha urged, panic rising in his voice. "Please, he's down there." Zainab dug harder. Her nails scraped against stones, her palms burning, but she ignored the pain. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was real, very real, and every second mattered. Suddenly, her hand hit something, not soil, not stone, something solid. She froze. Mustapha looked at her, his breath caught in his throat. "What is it?" he whispered. Zainab brushed the dirt away quickly. Fabric, dark, expensive. Her heart skipped. "He's here," she said, her voice barely steady. Mustapha's hands moved faster now, frantic, desperate. Together they cleared the soil away, uncovering more of the body beneath. A shoulder, an arm, a face. Chief Oladipo Balogun. His eyes were closed, his skin pale beneath the dirt. For a terrifying moment, he didn't move. Mustapha's chest tightened painfully. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Zainab leaned closer, pressing her fingers against his neck. Silence. Then a pulse. Faint. Weak. But there. "He's alive," she said quickly. "Barely, but he's alive." Mustapha exhaled sharply, his entire body shaking with relief. "Help me pull him out," Zainab ordered. They worked together, struggling against the weight of the earth and the man's body. It wasn't easy. Mustapha's strength was limited, and Zainab was already exhausted. But somehow, inch by inch, they managed. Finally, they pulled him free. Chief Oladipo's body collapsed onto the wet ground, unmoving, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Zainab immediately got to work. She checked his breathing, his airway, his pulse again. "His oxygen is low," she muttered. "We need to get him out of here now." Mustapha nodded rapidly. "Yes, yes, we have to go." But then a sound. Both of them froze. A branch snapped somewhere nearby. Zainab's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mustapha nodded slowly, fear creeping back into his chest. They came back. The forest felt different now, not empty, watching, listening. Zainab's mind raced. If the men returned and found them here, there would be no explanation, no escape, only danger. "We don't have time," she said urgently. "Help me lift him." Mustapha moved quickly, grabbing Chief Oladipo's arm and trying to support his weight. Zainab lifted from the other side, her muscles straining under the effort. "Move," she said. They started toward the edge of the clearing. Slowly, carefully, every step heavy, every second stretched thin. Behind them another sound. Closer this time. Footsteps. Mustapha's heart began to race again. "They're coming," he whispered. Zainab didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her pace quickened. They pushed forward, branches scratching against their skin mud, pulling at their feet, the weight of the man between them threatening to drag them down. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Because now it wasn't just about saving a life. It was about escaping with it. The forest seemed endless again, just like before. Every path looked the same. Every shadow held the possibility of danger. "Don't look back," Zainab said firmly. Mustapha obeyed, even though every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to see how close the danger was, to know. But he didn't. He kept moving, step by step, breath by breath, until the trees began to thin. The air shifted, and ahead, faint light, the road, hope, almost there. Zainab said, her voice strained but determined. Behind them, the footsteps grew louder, closer, too close. Mustapha's grip tightened. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed harder. Because failure was not an option. Not anymore. Not after everything. They burst through the final line of trees and stumbled onto the roadside, dragging Chief Oladipo with them. Zainab looked around desperately. "We need a car," she said. Now Mustapha's eyes scanned the road. Empty. Still empty. Panic surged. "No," he whispered. But then, headlights. Approaching. Fast. Zainab stepped into the road without hesitation, raising her arms. "Stop!" she shouted. The car slowed, then stopped. The driver rolled down his window, confusion on his face. "What is going on?" Zainab didn't waste time. "Medical emergency," she said firmly. "We need to get him to the hospital. Now." The driver hesitated, then looked at the man on the ground. Recognition flashed across his face. "Is that—" "Yes," Zainab said sharply. "And if we don't move, he will die." That was enough. "Get in," the driver said quickly. Relief flooded Mustapha's chest. Together they lifted Chief Oladipo into the back seat. Zainab climbed in beside him, already checking his breathing again. Mustapha hesitated for a second, then climbed in too. The door slammed shut. The engine roared, and as the car sped away from the forest, Mustapha looked back one last time. The trees stood silent, dark, hiding everything, but not for long, because what had been buried that night was no longer a secret. The car sped through the night, slicing through the wet roads of Lagos like a desperate plea racing against time. Inside, the air was thick with urgency. Zainab leaned over Chief Oladipo, her hands steady despite the chaos. She tilted his head slightly, checking his airway again, her fingers pressing against his neck for a pulse that felt like it might disappear at any second. "Stay with me," she murmured more to herself than to him. Mustapha sat pressed against the door, his small body trembling uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had carried him through the forest was fading, leaving behind exhaustion so deep it felt like it might swallow him whole. His hands were still covered in mud, his nails packed with dirt, but he didn't notice. All he could see was the man they had pulled from the ground, alive, barely. The driver glanced repeatedly in the rearview mirror, his earlier confusion replaced by something closer to shock. "Which hospital?" he asked. Zainab didn't hesitate. "Not the nearest one," she said. "Take us to St. Mary's Medical Center. It's farther, but they have better emergency equipment." "That's across the bridge," the driver replied, his voice tightening. "Traffic. There is no traffic at this hour." Zainab cut in firmly. "Just drive." Something in her tone left no room for argument. The driver nodded and pressed harder on the accelerator. The city blurred past them. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting brief flashes of light into the car, each one revealing the same fragile scene. A dying man, a determined nurse, and a boy who had no idea how he had ended up here. Mustapha's eyes never left Chief Oladipo. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if they were too late? What if everything they had done wasn't enough? His chest tightened. "Is he going to die?" he asked softly. The question hung in the air. Zainab didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted her grip, checking Oladipo's breathing again, her expression unreadable. "I won't let that happen," she said finally. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. Mustapha nodded slowly, clinging to her words like they were something solid in a world that rarely offered him anything to hold on to. Minutes passed. Each one felt longer than the last. Then a sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. A cough. Mustapha's eyes widened. "He moved!" he shouted. Zainab leaned closer instantly. Chief Oladipo's chest rose sharply, his body jerking slightly as air forced its way into his lungs. His eyes fluttered, struggling to open his face, tightening in pain. "Easy, easy," Zainab whispered, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're safe." The words felt almost unreal. Safe. After what had happened, after what he had been through. But still, she said them, because sometimes hope needed to be spoken before it could be believed. Chief Oladipo's lips parted. A sound came out, weak, broken. "Water." Zainab shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she said softly. "We need to get you to the hospital first." His eyes moved slowly, unfocused, trying to understand where he was. Then they landed on Mustapha. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Recognition, confusion, gratitude. It was impossible to tell, but Mustapha felt it, deep, real, and suddenly everything he had done felt worth it. Chief Oladipo's gaze drifted again, his strength fading just as quickly as it had returned. His eyes closed once more, his breathing shallow but steady. Zainab exhaled quietly. "That's a good sign," she said. Mustapha nodded, though he didn't fully understand what that meant. All he knew was he was still alive. The car sped onto the bridge, the city opening up around them in a wide stretch of glowing lights, reflected on the dark water below. Lagos at night, beautiful, distant, untouchable. But inside the car none of that mattered. Only time, only survival, only the fragile line between life and death. Then Zainab's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello, silence. Then a voice. Low, calm, dangerous. You shouldn't have done that. Zainab's body stiffened. Mustapha looked at her, fear rising instantly. Who is it? He whispered. Zainab didn't answer. Who is this? She demanded into the phone. A soft chuckle came from the other end. You know exactly who this is. Kunle. The name didn't need to be spoken. It was there, in the voice, in the threat. You took something that doesn't belong to you, Kunle continued. That was a mistake. Zainab's grip tightened around the phone. He's a human being, she said coldly. Not something you can bury and forget. Another chuckle. You think this is about morality? Kunle asked. This is about power. Mustapha's heart began to race again. They knew exactly where they were. You should turn around, Kunle said calmly. Put him back where you found him. Walk away, and maybe, just maybe, I'll forget about you. Zainab's eyes darkened, or what she challenged. The pause that followed was heavy, deliberate. Then, or you'll disappear, Kunle said simply, just like he was supposed to. The line went dead. Silence filled the car. The driver looked at Zainab through the mirror, his face pale. What was that? He asked. Zainab didn't respond immediately. She stared at the phone for a moment, then slowly lowered it. They're not done, she said quietly. Mustapha swallowed hard. What do we do? Zainab looked at him, really looked at him. This boy so small, so fragile, had already risked everything. And now, he was in deeper than he could understand. We finish what we started, she said firmly. The driver nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. No turning back, he muttered. The hospital came into view shortly after. Bright, alive, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. Pull up to the emergency entrance, Zainab instructed. The car screeched to a stop. Doors flew open. Help, Zainab shouted as she jumped out. We need help here! Nurses and orderlies rushed forward, their movements quick and practiced. What happened? One of them asked. Severe trauma, possible asphyxiation, low oxygen. Zainab replied rapidly. We need immediate intervention. They lifted Chief Oladipo onto a stretcher, rushing him inside. The doors swung open, then shut. Gone. Just like that. Mustapha stood there, staring after them. His body suddenly felt empty. The urgency, the fear, the adrenaline, all of it. Gone. Leaving behind only exhaustion. Deep, overwhelming. He swayed slightly. Zainab caught him just in time. Hey, she said gently. It's okay. You did well. Mustapha looked up at her. His eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Not fear, not pain, but something softer. I thought, no one would believe me, he said quietly. Zainab smiled faintly. I did, and in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, Mustapha believed something too, that, maybe, just maybe, He wasn't invisible after all, but as the hospital lights glowed around them, and the night slowly began to settle, neither of them realized the danger had not ended. It had only begun. The hospital doors swung shut behind the stretcher-sealing Chief Oladipo Balogun, inside a world of urgency machines and controlled chaos. Outside, Mustapha stood still, too still, as if his body had finally realized what it had been forced to endure. The bright lights of St. Mary's Medical Center felt harsh against his eyes after the darkness of the forest. Everything here was clean-ordered and distant from the world he knew. People moved with purpose, voices low but urgent footsteps echoing across polished floors. And yet, no one noticed him. Not really. A security guard approached first, his expression tightening the moment he saw Mustapha's appearance, mud-covered, soaked barefoot, looking more like trouble than a child. "You can't stand here," the guard said sharply. "Move along." Mustapha blinked, confused. I came with them," he said, pointing weakly toward the emergency entrance. "The man they brought him in." I helped the guard cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I said move," he repeated. "This is not a place for street boys." The words stung. Even now. Even after everything. Mustapha's shoulders dropped slightly, the fragile sense of belonging he had felt moments ago already beginning to crack. "But go," the guard snapped, stepping closer. Mustapha took a step back instinctively. His chest tightened again. Of course. Nothing had changed. He was still just a boy from the street. Invisible when it mattered. Unwanted when seen. Before he could say anything else, the doors opened again. Zainab stepped out. Her eyes immediately found Mustapha. "Stop," she said firmly. The guard paused. "He's with me." There was no hesitation in her voice this time. No softness, just authority. The guard frowned, clearly unconvinced, but stepped back. Zainab turned to Mustapha, her expression gentler now. "Don't go anywhere," she said. "I need you here." Mustapha nodded quickly. "I won't." For a moment, relief flickered in his chest again, but it didn't last. Because inside the hospital, things were not going as expected. Zainab walked back through the doors, her pace. Quick, her mind racing. She had given her report, explained the condition, the urgency, the situation in the forest. But something was wrong. Very wrong. Two senior doctors stood near the emergency room entrance, their expressions tense but not urgent in the way she expected. "What's happening?" Zainab asked, stepping toward them. "Why isn't he in surgery yet?" One of the doctors exchanged a glance with the other, then sighed. "We're waiting for authorization." Zainab froze. "Authorization," she repeated. "He's dying, we know who he is," the second doctor said quietly. "And that's exactly the problem." Zainab's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The first doctor lowered his voice. "There's already been a call." Zainab felt her stomach drop. "A call? From who?" The doctor hesitated. "Then from someone claiming to represent the Balogun family." "Of course. Kunle." Zainab's jaw tightened. "And what did they say?" she asked. The answer came slower this time. They said the patient was involved in an accident outside the city, that he's not to be treated here, that arrangements are being made to transfer him to a private facility. Zainab stared at them in disbelief. "That's a lie," she said sharply. "I found him buried alive in the forest. Someone tried to kill him." Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. The second doctor shifted slightly. "Zainab, do you understand what you're saying?" he asked carefully. "You're accusing powerful people of attempted murder. I'm stating facts," she shot back. "And we're telling you," the first doctor replied, his tone tightening, "that this is beyond us." Zainab stepped closer. "No," she said firmly. "It's not beyond you. He's a patient. He needs treatment. That's your job. The doctors exchanged another look. Then, "We've been instructed to wait," the second doctor said, quietly. The words hit like a wall, cold, immovable. Zainab felt anger rise in her chest, not loud, not explosive, but deep, controlled, dangerous. "And if he dies while you're waiting?" she asked. No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. He might. Zainab turned without another word and walked toward the emergency room. A nurse stepped in front of her. "You can't go in there," she said. Zainab didn't stop. "Watch me." Inside, Chief Oladipo lay on a hospital bed, machines connected to his body, his breathing uneven. His pulse weak but still present. Alive, but slipping. Zainab moved to his side, checking his vitals quickly. Low oxygen, dropping pressure. Time was running out. She looked around. No one else was moving. No one else was acting. They were waiting for permission, waiting for power, waiting for someone else to decide if this man deserved to live. Zainab's hands tightened. No, she wouldn't wait. Not for them, not for anyone. She grabbed a pair of gloves, pulling them on quickly. "What are you doing?" a voice demanded behind her. She didn't turn. "I'm doing my job. You don't have authorization." "I don't need it," she replied coldly. She adjusted the oxygen, checked his airway again. Her movements precise, focused. "You're going to get yourself in trouble," the voice warned. Zainab paused for a fraction of a second, then continued. "If I don't act," she said quietly, "he dies." Silence followed, because that was the truth. No one could argue with. Outside, Mustapha sat on a cold metal bench, his legs pulled close to his chest. The hospital lights buzzed softly above him, but he barely noticed. His mind was still in the forest, still seeing the grave, still hearing the voices, still feeling the fear. But now, there was something else. Uncertainty. He didn't understand what was happening inside. Did they save him? Was he okay? Or had everything been for nothing? Mustapha looked down at his hands. Still dirty, still shaking. He clenched them tightly. "No," he whispered to himself. "He has to live. Because if he didn't, then what was the point of any of this?" The doors opened again. Zainab stepped out. Her face was different now, not calm, not controlled, but determined in a way that felt stronger than before. Mustapha stood immediately. "What's happening?" he asked. Zainab looked at him. "They're trying to stop his treatment," she said. Mustapha's eyes widened. "Why? Because someone powerful wants him dead," she replied. The words hung in the air, heavy, real. Mustapha swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Zainab didn't hesitate. "We don't let them win." And in that moment, something shifted again. Not just in her, but in him. Because this wasn't just about saving a man anymore. It was about fighting something bigger, something darker, something that had always controlled people like him. Power. And for the first time in his life, Mustapha was standing against it. The hospital felt different now. Not just a place of healing, but a place of quiet resistance. Mustapha stood beside Zainab, his small frame, tense, his eyes searching her face for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The world had always been cruel, but this was something else entirely. "They want him to die, even here?" he asked softly. Zainab nodded. "Yes," she said, "and that's exactly why we can't let that happen." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of those words settled heavily between them. Then footsteps, firm, purposeful. A group of men in dark suits entered the hospital lobby, their presence cutting through the air like a blade. They didn't look around like ordinary visitors. They walked with certainty, with control, as if they already owned the space. Mustapha's body tensed instantly. He recognized that energy. Power. The kind that didn't need to shout. The kind that made people step aside without being asked. Zainab saw them too. Her expression hardened. "They're here," she said under her breath. Mustapha swallowed. "Who his family?" she replied, "or at least the ones who want control." The men approached the reception desk first, speaking in low, controlled tones. Papers were exchanged, names mentioned, authority asserted. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. Nurses stood straighter, staff moved quicker, eyes avoided direct contact. The system was responding. Mustapha felt it, that invisible force again, the one that decided who mattered and who didn't. One of the men turned. His eyes scanned the room, and then locked onto them. Mustapha's heart skipped. Even from a distance, there was something cold about him. His face was composed, almost calm, but his eyes carried something darker. Calculating, watching, Kunle Balogun. He didn't need to introduce himself. Mustapha knew. Zainab stepped slightly in front of Mustapha, her posture protective. Kunle approached slowly, his polished shoes echoing softly against the floor. When he stopped in front of them, he smiled. But it wasn't kindness. It was control. "You must be the nurse," he said smoothly, his voice calm measured. "Zainab, isn't it?" Zainab didn't respond immediately. "How do you know my name?" she asked. Kunle's smile widened just slightly. "You've made yourself noticeable." Mustapha felt a chill run down his spine. Kunle's gaze shifted. To him, slowly, carefully, taking everything in, the mud, the torn clothes, the fear. "A witness," Kunle said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Mustapha's throat tightened. Zainab stepped forward. "He's a child," she said firmly. "Leave him out of this." Kunle tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. "Children see things they don't understand," he said. "And sometimes they say things that cause problems." He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Mustapha's level. Mustapha didn't move, didn't breathe. Kunle's eyes locked onto his. "What did you see?" he asked softly. The question felt like a trap. Mustapha's heart pounded. He wanted to speak, to tell the truth, to say everything, but the fear, it wrapped around his throat like a chain. Zainab placed a hand on his shoulder. "He doesn't have to answer you," she said sharply. Kunle's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Annoyance. "Of course," he said, standing up again. "We all have choices." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something. Money, a thick bundle. He held it out. "To help you," he said, looking at Mustapha. "You've had a difficult night. Take this. Forget what you think you saw. Go back to your life." Mustapha stared at the money. His mind spun. Food, shelter, safety. Everything he had ever needed. In one moment, all he had to do was say nothing, was walk away. His fingers twitched, just slightly. Zainab saw it. "Mustapha," she said gently, "look at me." He did. Her eyes were steady, strong. "You already made your choice," she said. The words hit deeper than anything else. Mustapha swallowed hard. Then slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. Kunle raised an eyebrow. "No," he repeated. Mustapha's voice grew stronger. "I'm not lying," he said. "I saw what you did." Silence, heavy, sharp. The air itself seemed to tighten. Kunle's smile faded. Not completely, but enough. "Be careful," he said softly. "Truth can be dangerous." Zainab stepped forward again. "Are you threatening him?" she demanded. Kunle straightened his jacket. "I'm advising him," he replied calmly. He glanced toward the emergency wing. "Take care of my uncle," he added. "We'll be handling things from here." Zainab's eyes hardened. "No," she said. Kunle paused, turned. "No," he echoed. He stays under medical care, she said firmly. Not under your control. A flicker of something darker crossed Kunle's face. You're overstepping, he said. I'm doing my job, she replied. Their eyes locked, power against principle. Silence stretched between them. Then Kunle smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see how long that lasts, he said. He turned and walked away, his men following without question. The tension lingered, long after he left. Mustapha exhaled slowly, his body finally releasing the breath it had been holding. I thought, he began, then stopped. Zainab looked at him. What I thought I was going to disappear, he admitted quietly. Zainab's expression softened. You're still here, she said. Mustapha nodded, but something had changed. He could feel it. This wasn't over, not even close. Inside the hospital, the pressure began to build. Orders were being whispered, phones were ringing, decisions being made behind closed doors. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a man lay between life and death, a man who knew the truth, a man who could expose everything. If he lived. Zainab looked toward the emergency room. They're going to try something, she said. Mustapha frowned. What do you mean, they won't stop? She replied. Not until they get what they want. Mustapha's chest tightened. Then what do we do? Zainab turned to him, her eyes steady. We protect him, she said. Mustapha nodded, even though he didn't know how, even though he was just a boy, even though the world had never protected him. Because somehow, this had become bigger than fear, bigger than survival. It was about truth. And for the first time in his life, Mustapha was part of something that mattered. Not invisible, not forgotten, but standing. Right in the middle of a fight he never asked for, but refused to walk away from. Inside, the emergency ward time no longer moved in minutes. It moved in breaths. Each rise of Chief Oladipo Balogun's chest was a fragile negotiation with death. Each drop in his vitals was a silent warning that the line between survival and loss was thinning. Zainab stood at his bedside, her focus absolute. Monitors blinked beside him, their soft beeping forming a rhythm that felt both reassuring and terrifying. Tubes fed oxygen into his lungs, fluids into his veins, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. His oxygen saturation is dropping again, one of the junior nurses whispered. Zainab nodded, already adjusting the mask, her movements precise and controlled. We need to stabilize him before we can move forward, she said. But even as she spoke, she knew this wasn't just a medical fight. It was something else, something deeper. Because outside those doors, power was waiting, and power didn't care about protocols. Across the hallway, a senior doctor stood with his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice low but urgent. Yes, I understand, but the situation is critical. A pause. Then his expression shifted. Not relief, not confidence, but submission. Yes, sir, he said quietly. We'll proceed as instructed. He hung up slowly. Zainab didn't need to ask who that call had come from. She already knew. Kunle. The pressure was tightening. From above, from within, from every direction. The doctor approached her cautiously. Zainab, he began. We need to talk. She didn't look up. I'm busy saving a life, she said. This is about that life, he insisted. She exhaled slowly, then turned. What now? He hesitated. Then the family has requested a transfer. Zainab's eyes hardened instantly. He's not stable enough to be moved, she said. They're sending a private ambulance, the doctor continued. Fully equipped. They say he'll receive better care there. Zainab let out a short, bitter laugh. Better care, she repeated. Or quieter control. The doctor didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Listen, he said, finally lowering his voice. You're putting yourself at risk. This is not a normal case. These are powerful people. They don't lose. Zainab stepped closer. Then maybe it's time someone showed them they can, she said. The doctor looked at her, something like respect flickering beneath his concern. And how do you plan to do that? He asked. Zainab didn't respond immediately, because the truth was, she didn't know, not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop. Across the hall, Mustapha sat where she had left him, his eyes fixed on the emergency doors. Every time they opened, his body, tensed, hope rising and falling with each passing figure. He didn't understand everything happening inside, but he understood enough. They were trying to take him away. The man he had saved, the man who had looked at him like he mattered. Mustapha clenched his fists. "No," he whispered under his breath. He couldn't let that happen, not after everything. A nurse passed by carrying a tray. Mustapha stood suddenly. "Excuse me," he said. The nurse paused, glancing at him briefly. "What is it?" "The man, the one they brought in," Mustapha said quickly. "Are they going to move him?" The nurse hesitated, then sighed. "That's what I heard," she said. "Family request." Mustapha's chest tightened. "But he's not okay yet," he said. "He needs help." The nurse gave him a tired look. "I don't make the decisions," she replied. And just like that, the system spoke again. Power decided. Others followed. Mustapha looked back at the emergency doors. His mind raced. There had to be something he could do. Because standing still, watching, that wasn't enough anymore. Not after the forest, not after everything. Inside the ward, Chief Oladipo's condition shifted again. His breathing grew more erratic, his pulse weaker. Zainab frowned. "This isn't right," she muttered. She checked the IV line, then the monitor, then his pupils. Something was off, something beyond the injuries. "Get me his chart," she said sharply. A nurse handed it over. Zainab scanned it quickly, then froze. Her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" she demanded. The nurse leaned closer. What Zainab pointed to the medication record. "This dosage. Who authorized this?" The nurse frowned. I'm not sure." Zainab's mind raced. The medication listed was strong. Too strong. Not something you gave to someone in his condition. Unless you wanted to slow his body down. Too much. Her heart skipped. "No," she whispered. It wasn't just pressure. It wasn't just influence. Someone inside the hospital was helping them. "Stop all current medications," she ordered immediately. What the nurse asked startled. Now Zainab snapped. The nurse moved quickly. Zainab adjusted the IV, replacing the line. Her hands moving faster now, urgency sharpening every movement. "They're trying to finish what they started," she said under her breath. Outside, Mustapha saw movement. 2 men, different from before, dressed in clean uniforms, pushing a stretcher, a private ambulance crew. They were here. His heart dropped. "They're going to take him," he whispered. Without thinking, he moved, running toward the emergency doors. Inside, Zainab heard the commotion. She looked up, just as Mustapha burst in. "They're here," he shouted. "They're going to take him." Zainab's jaw tightened. She already knew, but hearing it made it real, immediate. "Not yet," she said. The doors opened again. The private team entered, led by a man holding official-looking documents. "We're here for Mr. Balogun," he said confidently. Zainab stepped forward. "He's not stable," she said. The man handed her the papers. "Transfer authorization," he replied. "Signed and approved." Zainab glanced at it. Everything looked official. Everything looked legal. But she knew the truth. "This is wrong," she said. "That's not your decision," the man replied. Behind him, more staff began preparing to move the bed. Mustapha stepped forward suddenly. "No," he said. Everyone paused. The room went still. All eyes turned to him. "He can't go." Mustapha continued, his voice shaking but loud enough. "They tried to kill him. They'll do it again." Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. The man with the documents frowned. "Who is this?" he asked. No one, another voice muttered. But Mustapha didn't stop. "I saw them," he said. "I saw everything." Zainab looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Pride, strength. "You heard him," she said firmly. "This is not just a medical case. This is attempted murder." The room tensed. Lines were being drawn. Quietly, dangerously. The man with the documents lowered his voice. "You're making a serious accusation," he said. Zainab met his gaze. "And I'm ready to stand by it." For a moment, no one moved. Then from the doorway, a new voice. Cold, controlled, "And I'm ready to end it. Kunle." He stood there, watching, waiting. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. The room fell into a silence so heavy, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Kunle Balogun stepped inside slowly, his polished shoes, making soft, deliberate sounds against the hospital floor. Every movement he made was controlled, measured as if he already knew the outcome of whatever would happen next. Behind him, two men in suits remained near the door, their presence quiet, but unmistakably threatening. Mustapha felt his chest tighten. This was the man from the forest. The same voice, the same eyes, only now, dressed in power. Zainab did not move. She stood her ground beside the hospital bed, her posture firm, her gaze locked onto Kunle, without fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Kunle's lips curved into a faint smile, and yet he replied calmly, "Here I am." His eyes shifted to the bed, to Chief Oladipo, still unconscious, still fragile, still alive. For a brief moment, something flickered across Kunle's face. Not concern, not relief, but calculation, as if he were adjusting his plans. "He's strong," Kunle said softly. "Stronger than I expected." Zainab's jaw tightened. "You mean harder to kill," she shot back. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. The tension was no longer hidden. It was out in the open now, clear, dangerous. Kunle let out a quiet breath, as if amused by her boldness. "You're very direct," he said. "I respect that." Then his tone changed, subtly, sharpening. "But you're also very naive." Zainab didn't respond. She didn't need to. Kunle stepped closer. "You think this is about right and wrong," he continued. "About saving a life, about doing your job." He shook his head slightly. "This is about control," he said. "About legacy, about what happens when a man refuses to step aside." Mustapha listened, his heart pounding. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, the kind that destroyed people. Quietly, completely, Zainab crossed her arms. "And your solution is to bury him alive?" she asked. Kunle's eyes met hers. For a moment, silence. "Then you say that like it's shocking," he replied. The room seemed to shrink. The air grew tighter. Mustapha's breath caught. He said it so easily, so calmly, as if it meant nothing. Zainab stepped forward. "You admitted it," she said. Kunle smiled again. "Did I?" he asked. "Or did you hear what you wanted to hear?" The words twisted, slippery, dangerous. This was his game. Control the narrative, bend the truth, make reality uncertain. Zainab didn't fall for it. "You can twist words all you want," she said, "but there's a witness." She placed a hand on Mustapha's shoulder. Kunle's gaze shifted again. Back to the boy. This time longer, more intense. Mustapha felt it. That weight, that pressure, but he didn't look away. Not this time. "He's a child," Kunle said. Children imagine things. I don't, Mustapha said suddenly. His voice was small, but steady. Kunle raised an eyebrow. No, Mustapha shook his head. I saw you, he said, in the forest. You and the other man. The room held its breath. Even the machines seemed quieter. Kunle studied him, long, carefully. Then he laughed, softly, almost kindly. You're brave, he said. I'll give you that. But there was no warmth in it, only calculation. Do you know what happens to brave boys who speak too much? He asked. Mustapha didn't answer, but his heart raced. Zainab stepped in immediately. That's enough, she said sharply. You don't get to threaten him. Kunle straightened. I'm not threatening him, he said calmly. I'm educating him. He turned slightly, addressing the room now. Let's be clear, he continued. My uncle is unwell. There has been confusion, misinformation. He gestured lightly. This boy, he said, is not a reliable source. Mustapha's fists clenched. Zainab's voice cut through. He saved your uncle's life, she said. That made Kunle pause, just for a second. Then how touching, he replied. A hero from the streets. His tone shifted again, harder, but that doesn't make him credible. Zainab stepped closer. It makes him the only reason your uncle is still breathing, she said. Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable, because that was truth, and truth had weight. Even here, even now. Kunle's eyes flickered. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper. A crack, small, but there. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said quietly. Zainab met his gaze. Good, she replied. The tension snapped tighter. Then a sound, from the bed. Everyone turned. Chief Oladipo's hand moved, slightly. His fingers twitched. Then his eyes fluttered. Open, weak, unfocused, but open. Mustapha's breath caught. He's awake, he whispered. Zainab moved instantly. Mr. Balogan, she said gently, can you hear me? His lips moved. No sound, just a faint attempt. Kunle stepped forward. Too quickly. Uncle, he said, his voice suddenly softer. It's me. You're safe. Zainab's eyes narrowed. Safe. The word felt wrong. Dangerous. Chief Oladipo's gaze shifted slowly. From Zainab to Mustapha, then to Kunle. And something changed. Recognition. Not warmth, not relief, but something else. Fear. His breathing quickened. His body tensed weakly. No, he whispered. The word was faint, but clear. Kunle froze, just for a second, then recovered. You're confused, he said calmly. You've been through a lot. But Chief Oladipo shook his head slightly. No, he repeated. His eyes locked onto Zainab. Struggling, fighting. He tried to say. His voice broke, but the meaning was there. Zainab leaned closer. It's okay, she said. You're safe. We're here. His hand lifted weakly, pointing, not at Zainab, not at Mustapha, at Kunle. The room went still, completely. They tried, he whispered. Kunle's expression didn't change, but something in the room shifted. Everything. The truth was no longer just a story. It was spoken by the man who survived, and no one could ignore it anymore. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. Because what Chief Oladipo had just said, broken, fragile, barely audible, carried more weight than any shouting ever could. They tried. His hand trembled weakly in the air, still pointing toward Kunle. And in that moment, everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. Zainab felt it first, the shift, the undeniable crack in the control Kunle had so carefully maintained. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto him. This is your chance, she said quietly. Walk away, or face what comes next. Kunle didn't respond immediately. His face remained composed, his posture relaxed. But his eyes betrayed him. For the first time there was tension there. Not fear, not yet, but something close. Because this was not supposed to happen. Chief Oladipo was not supposed to wake up. Not here, not now, not like this. Kunle exhaled slowly, then smiled. A controlled smile. Calculated. "You're misunderstanding," he said. Zainab almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He just pointed at you," she said. "What exactly is there to misunderstand?" Kunle tilted his head slightly. "A man recovering from trauma," he replied smoothly, disoriented, confused, possibly hallucinating. His voice was calm, too calm. He could be pointing at anyone, he added. The lie slid into the room, like smoke, subtle, trying to blur the edges of truth. But this time, it didn't settle, because now there was more than one witness. Zainab stepped aside slightly, revealing Mustapha. He saw everything she said. Kunle's gaze flicked toward the boy again, this time longer, more dangerous. Mustapha felt the weight of it pressing down on him, but he didn't step back. Not anymore. "I told you," Mustapha said, his voice steadier than before. "I saw you in the forest." Silence. The staff in the room shifted uncomfortably. They had heard enough, seen enough. Even if no one wanted to say it out loud, something was very wrong, and everyone knew it. Kunle looked around slowly, taking in the faces, the uncertainty, the doubt. His control, slipping. Just slightly, but enough. He couldn't allow that. Not here, not now. He straightened his jacket. "Enough," he said calmly, then turned to the private medical team waiting near the door. "Prepare him for transfer." Zainab stepped forward immediately. "No," she said. Kunle didn't even look at her. "This is not a request." Zainab's voice sharpened. "And this is not your hospital." The tension snapped tighter. The private team hesitated, caught between authority and uncertainty. Kunle's eyes finally moved back to Zainab. "You're interfering," he said quietly. "I'm protecting a patient," she replied. "He's my family," Kunle said, "and he's my responsibility right now." Zainab shot back. Their voices remained low, controlled, but the clash was undeniable. Power against principle, control against truth. Kunle stepped closer. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said. Zainab didn't move. "Neither do you," she replied. For a moment they stood inches apart, neither backing down, neither willing to yield. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Everyone stepped back, all heads turned. A senior hospital administrator had entered the room, flanked by 2 security officers. His expression was serious, alert, and different from before. More cautious. "What is going on here?" he asked. Zainab spoke first. "Attempted murder," she said. Kunle didn't react. The administrator looked between them, then at Chief Oladipo, still weak, but conscious. "Sir," he said gently, stepping closer to the bed. "Can you tell us what happened?" Chief Oladipo's breathing was uneven, his strength fading again, but his eyes, still sharp enough, still aware. He looked at the administrator. Then slowly, painfully, he turned his gaze toward Kunle and whispered. "He tried." The words were barely there, but they were enough. The administrator's expression changed, subtly but clearly. He straightened and turned to Kunle. "Sir," he said carefully, "we may need to involve the authorities." There it was, the word no one wanted to say: police. Kunle's smile faded. "Just a fraction, but enough." "That won't be necessary," he said. "I'm afraid it might be," the administrator replied. Kunle's eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. The administrator didn't respond. Because now, he had seen enough. He turned to one of the staff members. "Call it in," he said. The room shifted again. Faster this time, more urgent, more real. Kunle's jaw tightened. This was moving too quickly, too far. He stepped back slightly, reassessing, recalculating. Then he smiled again. But this time, there was no warmth left at all. "Very well," he said softly. "If that's how you want to play this." He turned toward the door, but before leaving, he stopped and looked back at Mustapha for a long moment, long enough to send a message without words. This isn't over. Then he walked out, his men following. The room remained silent for a few seconds after he left. Then everything moved at once. Staff rushing, voices rising, calls being made, the system. Finally reacting, Zainab exhaled slowly, her hands still trembling slightly, but her eyes steady. "He's not finished," she said quietly. Mustapha looked at her. "I know," he replied, because he felt it too, that look, that promise. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. But something had changed, for the first time. The truth was no longer buried. Not in the forest, not in silence, not in fear, it was out. And no matter how powerful Kunle was, he couldn't bury it again, not completely, not anymore. Mustapha looked at Chief Oladipo, still weak, still fighting, but alive, and because of that, everything else was possible. The hospital no longer felt like a place of quiet hesitation. It had awakened. Phones rang louder. Footsteps moved faster. Voices carried urgency that could no longer be hidden behind politeness or fear. What had started as a whispered suspicion was now something undeniable, something that demanded attention. Truth. And truth, once spoken, refused to be silenced. Mustapha stood near the corner of the room, his small frame almost swallowed by the activity around him. Yet for the first time in his life, he was not invisible. People looked at him now, not with dismissal, but with curiosity, with concern, with something close to respect. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but he didn't look away, he didn't shrink, because deep inside something had changed. He had spoken, and the world had listened. Across the room, Chief Oladipo lay connected to machines that now worked with renewed urgency. Doctors moved around him, no longer waiting, no longer hesitating. Decisions were being made, real ones, not controlled by distant voices. Zainab stood beside them, guiding, correcting, insisting. "His pressure is stabilizing," one of the doctors said. "Keep it steady," Zainab replied. "We can't afford another drop." Her voice carried weight now, authority, because she had been right, and everyone knew it. A nurse approached her quickly. "They're on their way," she said. Zainab looked up. "The police." The nurse nodded. "Yes, and someone else." Zainab frowned slightly. "Who?" The nurse hesitated. "Members of the board," she said. "From Balogan Group." Zainab's eyes narrowed. The game was expanding. Power was shifting. The truth was pulling more people into its orbit, and not all of them would be on the same side. Minutes later, the hospital entrance filled again. This time, not with quiet control, but with visible tension. Police officers entered first, their presence firm-structured, cutting through the chaos with authority that even power struggled to ignore. Behind them came several sharply dressed individuals, men and women, whose expressions carried a mix of concern, calculation, and something deeper. They were not like Kunle, but they were not innocent either. They were stakeholders, people whose lives, wealth, and futures were tied to one man lying between life and death. Mustapha watched them carefully. He didn't know their names, but he recognized what they represented. A different kind of power, one that didn't shout, but decided. An officer approached Zainab. "You're the one who made the call?" he asked. Zainab nodded. "Yes, what happened?" Zainab didn't hesitate. She told him everything: the forest, the grave, the attempt, the rescue. Her voice remained steady, clear, unwavering, and when she finished, She gestured toward Mustapha. He saw it too, she said. The officer turned. His eyes landed on the boy. For a moment, there was silence. Then he walked over, knelt slightly to meet Mustapha at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mustapha," he replied. The officer nodded. "Can you tell me what you saw?" Mustapha swallowed. This was it. The moment, again. But this time, it felt different. There was fear, yes, but there was also something else. Strength. He took a breath, then spoke. He told the story, from the beginning. The rain, the sound, the men, the grave, the face, the escape, the rescue. Every detail, every moment. His voice trembled at times, but he didn't stop, didn't look away, didn't change the truth. And when he finished, the room was quiet, not uncomfortable, not doubtful, but attentive. The officer stood slowly. "Thank you," he said. Simple, but real. He turned to his team. "Secure the area," he ordered. "We'll need to investigate the site immediately." The words carried weight, action, not hesitation. Across the room, one of the board members stepped forward. An older woman, her posture strong, her eyes sharp with intelligence, and something deeper, something like grief. "I am Madame Bisi Adebayo," she said, vice chair of Balogan Group. Her gaze moved to Chief Oladipo, then to Zainab, then finally to Mustapha. Her expression softened slightly. "You saved him?" she asked. Mustapha hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Madame Bisi held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she bowed her head slightly. Not deeply, but enough. A gesture of respect. "Then you have done what many of us could not," she said quietly. Mustapha blinked. He didn't know what to say. He had never been spoken to like that before. Never been seen like that before. Zainab watched the exchange, something warm, flickering in her chest. This was what truth could do. Not just expose, but restore. But the moment didn't last, because reality was still moving. An officer returned. "Sir," he said, "we've received confirmation. The location matches the boy's description. There are signs of recent digging." The room tightened again. Evidence, real, physical, undeniable. The officer nodded. "Good, we'll proceed." Another voice cut in. "What about Kunle Balogan?" It was one of the board members. The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, because now it had to be answered. The officer looked at them. At this stage, he said carefully, "He is a person of interest, not accused, not yet, but close, very close." Zainab felt a quiet satisfaction. Not victory, not yet, but movement, real movement. Mustapha looked toward the door, half expecting Kunle to walk back in, to deny everything, to take control again. But he didn't, because for the first time, he couldn't. Not completely. Chief Oladipo stirred again, slightly stronger this time. His eyes opened, clearer, more focused. Zainab moved quickly. "You're okay," she said gently. "You're safe." He looked at her, then around the room, then at Mustapha. Recognition, gratitude, and something deeper, something unspoken. His lips moved. "Thank you." The word was faint, but it reached. Mustapha felt his chest tighten, his eyes stung. He nodded slowly, unable to speak, because in that moment, everything made sense. The fear, the pain, the risk. It had all led here, to this, a life saved, a truth revealed, a voice heard. But even as the room filled with movement, decisions, and shifting power, one thing remained certain. This wasn't over, not yet, because men like Kunle didn't fall easily, and battles like this were never won in a single moment. They were fought, step by step, truth by truth, until finally, justice had no choice but to stand. Morning did not arrive gently. It broke into the hospital like a truth that could no longer be delayed. Sunlight pushed through the tall glass windows, washing over polished floors, over anxious faces, over a building that had not slept. The long night had carried secrets, fear, and quiet resistance, but now under daylight, everything felt exposed, and exposure was dangerous. Mustapha stood near the far end of the corridor, his eyes fixed on the movement unfolding before him. The hospital had transformed overnight. It was no longer just a place of medicine. It had become a battleground. Police officers moved in and out of rooms with purpose. Staff whispered in clusters. Phones rang constantly. News had begun to spread. Not officially, not yet, but enough. Because truth had a way of leaking, and once it did, it could not be contained. Zainab approached him. Her steps slower now, exhaustion beginning to show beneath her strength. Her uniform was creased, her eyes tired. But there was something steady in her presence. "We've secured him," she said quietly. Mustapha looked up. "Is he okay?" Zainab nodded. "Stable," she replied. "Not fully out of danger, but he's fighting." Mustapha exhaled slowly. That word again. Fighting. It felt right. Because everything about this moment was a fight. Before either of them could say more, the corridor shifted again. A group entered, larger than before, more deliberate. At the center, Kunle. But he was not the same man who had walked in hours earlier. The calm confidence was still there. But it was strained now, pressed, tested. Because this time, he was not in control. Two officers walked beside him, not escorting, not restraining, but watching, carefully, closely. Kunle's eyes moved through the corridor, taking everything in. The police, the board members, the staff, the shifting balance. And then they landed on Mustapha. For a brief moment, the world narrowed. Just the two of them. Boy and man. Truth and power. Mustapha didn't look away. Not this time, not ever again. Kunle held the gaze, then looked past him, as if he no longer mattered, but that was the lie he needed to believe. Inside the main conference room, everything had been prepared. Not for a meeting, but for something else, something heavier. Chief Oladipo had been moved there under strict supervision, surrounded by medical staff, monitored closely, but awake enough to speak. The board members gathered. The police stood nearby. And at the center of it all, Truth waited. Mustapha stood just outside the doorway, watching. Zainab beside him. Neither of them invited, but neither of them leaving. Because this was their fight, too. Inside, Madame Bisi Adebayo stepped forward. Her presence commanded attention without effort. "We cannot delay this any longer," she said. "What happened last night demands clarity." Her eyes moved to Chief Oladipo. "Sir," she said gently, "can you tell us what happened?" The room held its breath. Chief Oladipo shifted slightly, the effort visible in every movement. His strength was not fully returned, but his voice carried. "They tried to kill me," he said. No hesitation, no confusion, just truth, clear, sharp, final. A ripple moved through the room. Some faces hardened, others fell, but no one spoke. Because now, there was nothing left to hide behind. Madame Bisi turned slowly, her gaze landing on Kunle. "Do you have anything to say?" Kunle didn't respond immediately. He stood still, composed, calculating. Then he stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding," he said calmly. "My uncle is recovering from trauma. His memory is not reliable. The same tactic, the same control, but weaker now, because this time there were too many eyes, too many ears, too much truth." One of the officers stepped forward. "We also have a witness," he said. The room shifted again. Mustapha felt Zainab's hand gently press against his shoulder. "You don't have to," she whispered. But Mustapha shook his head. "I do." He stepped forward, into the room, into the light, into everything. All eyes turned to him, the boy from the street, the one who wasn't supposed to matter, but now, he did. The officer nodded. "Tell them," he said. Mustapha took a breath, then spoke. Again, but this time, stronger, clearer, without fear. He told the story, every detail, every moment, and when he finished, silence, heavy, unavoidable. Madame Bisi looked at him, then at Kunle, then back again, and something in her expression changed. Not doubt, not hesitation, but decision. "This is no longer internal," she said firmly. "This is criminal." Kunle's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake," he said. Madame Bisi met his gaze. "No," she replied. "You did." The officers stepped forward, this time closer. "Real. Kunle Balogun," one of them said. "You are required to come with us for questioning." The words echoed, not loudly, but powerfully. Kunle didn't resist. He didn't panic, he didn't break. But something in his eyes shifted, just for a second, because even he knew this was not something he could control anymore. As they turned to escort him out, he paused, looked back at Mustapha, long, cold, unfinished. But this time, there was no threat, no power, just distance. Then he was gone, and just like that, the room exhaled. The weight lifted, not completely, but enough. Mustapha stood still, his heart racing, his body trembling, but his eyes steady. Zainab stepped beside him. "It's over," she said softly. Mustapha shook his head. "No," he replied. She looked at him. He looked toward the door, where Kunle had disappeared. "Not yet," he said. Because something inside him knew. This wasn't just about one man, one night, one truth. It was about something bigger, something that didn't disappear easily. But for the first time, it had been challenged. And for the first time, it had begun to fall. The days that followed did not explode into celebration. They unfolded slowly, carefully, like a wound learning how to heal. Lagos moved on as it always did. Cars filled the roads again, markets reopened. Voices rose and fell in the rhythm of survival. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. A story had begun to spread. Not loudly, not officially, but through whispers. A boy from the street. A buried man who lived. A truth that refused to stay hidden. And at the center of it all, Mustapha. He sat outside the hospital on the same metal bench, but everything felt different now. The air no longer pressed against him. The silence no longer swallowed him whole. People passed by. Some glanced at him, some didn't. But for once, he didn't feel invisible. Zainab stepped out to join him, holding 2 small cups of tea. She handed one to him without a word. Mustapha took it carefully. "Thank you," he said. Zainab smiled faintly. "You're getting used to that," she replied. Mustapha looked down at the cup. Steam rose slowly, curling into the air. Warm, real, something simple, but something he hadn't had in a long time. "Is he okay?" he asked after a moment. Zainab nodded. "He's awake," she said. "Stronger today." Mustapha's chest eased. "Can I see him?" Zainab studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yes." Inside the hospital felt calmer now. The tension had not disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer fear. It was transition. Chief Oladipo Balogun sat upright in his bed, supported by pillows. His face still pale, but no longer fragile. His eyes were clear now, sharp aware, fully present. When Mustapha entered, he looked up and smiled. Not a powerful smile, not a public one, but a quiet one, a human one. "Come here," he said gently. Mustapha hesitated for a second, then stepped closer. Zainab remained near the door watching, always watching. "You saved my life," Chief Oladipo said. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Mustapha looked down. "I just didn't want you to die," he said. Chief Oladipo nodded slowly. "That is more than most people would have done," he replied. There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth, and something deeper, understanding. "You saw everything?" he asked. Mustapha nodded. "Yes." A pause. "Then were you afraid?" Mustapha didn't answer immediately. "Then yes," he said. Chief Oladipo smiled again. "And you stayed anyway," he said. Mustapha looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, there was no distance between them. No wealth, no poverty, just two people, connected by a choice. "I don't know why," Mustapha admitted quietly. Chief Oladipo leaned back slightly. "I do," he said. Mustapha frowned. Why, Chief Oladipo's eyes softened. "Because your heart is still alive," he said. The words settled deeply, not just heard. Felt. Zainab watched from the doorway, her expression calm but touched, because she knew that was the truth. Not the one written in reports, not the one argued in rooms, but the real one, the one that mattered. Later that day, things began to move forward. Officially, statements were taken, evidence reviewed. The forest site confirmed everything: the grave, the signs of struggle, the truth. Kunle Balogun and Sadiq Bello were no longer just names whispered in tension. They were now part of a case, a real one, with consequences. The board of Balogun Group issued a formal statement, carefully worded, but clear enough. Leadership would be reviewed. Control would shift. Power would change hands. And in the middle of all of it, a decision was made. Not by the system, not by power, but by a man who had seen death and chosen life. Chief Oladipo called Mustapha back into the room that evening. This time, Zainab stayed. "You have no family?" he asked gently. Mustapha shook his head. "No." Chief Oladipo was quiet for a moment. "Then you do," he said. Mustapha blinked. "What? I want to take care of you," he continued. "Not as charity, not as obligation, but because you deserve a chance." The words felt unreal, too big, too sudden. Mustapha's chest tightened. I don't know how to live like that," he admitted. Chief Oladipo nodded. "That's okay," he said. "We'll learn together." Zainab stepped forward slightly. "Only if he wants it," she added. Chief Oladipo smiled. "Of course." Mustapha looked between them. The man he saved, the woman who believed him. Two people who had changed everything. And for the first time, he was being asked, not told, not ignored. Asked, "What do you want?" Zainab said gently. Mustapha swallowed. His mind raced. The streets, the hunger, the cold nights, the loneliness. Then this, warmth, safety, a future. He looked at Chief Oladipo, then at Zainab, then he nodded. "Yes," he said. Simple, but final, and just like that. A new life began. Not perfectly, not instantly, but real. Days turned into weeks. The case moved forward, slowly, but surely. Truth continued to rise. And Mustapha no longer walked the streets alone. He walked through doors, through classrooms, through places that once felt impossible. But he didn't forget. He never would, because the boy from the street was still part of him, and always would be. And sometimes late at night he would sit quietly, thinking about that moment, the rain, the forest, the hand reaching out, and the choice he made, the one that changed everything. Not just for a man, but for himself, because in a world that had given him nothing, he had still chosen to give something back, and in doing so, he had found something greater than survival. He had found purpose. Some stories are not about power, they are about choice. Mustapha had nothing, no home, no protection, no voice in a world that rarely listens. Yet in the moment that mattered most, he chose not to walk away. He chose courage over fear, truth over silence, and compassion over survival. And that choice changed everything, not just for Chief Oladipo, but for himself. Because real strength is not found in wealth, status, or control. It is found in the heart, that refuses to become cold, even when the world has been cruel. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect. What would you have done? Would you have walked away or stepped forward? Let me know in the comments. Tell me your country and your local time. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories where kindness wins, where truth rises, and where even the smallest voice can change the world, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the story you hear today might be the one that changes your tomorrow.